I never thought a spilled coffee could change the course of my entire day. Heck, maybe even my life. But here we are. So picture this. It's a usual Tuesday morning, and I'm running late for work, juggling my laptop bag, a half-eaten granola bar, and the biggest cup of coffee I could find at the corner cafe down the street. I'm already in that frazzled, half-awake mode where everything feels like a blur, and honestly, all I want is to make it to my desk without tripping over anything or anyone. That's when he bumped into me. Literally, bumped. Not a gentle brush, or a polite, excuse me, but full-on collision. Coffee went flying, right onto my shirt, and, of course, onto my favorite jeans, which I swear were clean 5 minutes ago. I froze, staring down at the spreading dark stain, like it was some sort of disaster movie slowly unfolding across my chest. Then, without missing a beat, the guy who caused this whole mess crouched down, grabbed a napkin, and started dabbing at the stain. I was about to protest because, seriously, who even does that? When he paused, looked up at me with these intense, slightly amused eyes, and then, of all things, he licked his finger to clean the napkin. Yeah, his finger. I know it sounds weird. It was weird. But at that moment, it was also kind of hilarious, and honestly, a little charming in that oddly awkward way. I mean, who licks their finger like they're trying to channel some old-school romantic movie hero instead of just grabbing a new napkin? This guy clearly wasn't your average coffee spiller. He introduced himself as Jamie, with a grin that made me forget about the coffee stain for just a second. He had this easy confidence, like he knew exactly how ridiculous the whole situation was but didn't care, and somehow, I liked it. We ended up chatting right there on the sidewalk as the morning rush buzzed around us. Jamie's in town for a few weeks on a work project, and he was way more interesting than the usual commuter crowd I dodge every morning. He asked about my job, my weekend plans, and even joked about how I should probably stop wearing white shirts on busy coffee days. By the time I realized I was late enough to have missed my first meeting, I looked down and saw the coffee stain still there, only now it felt like a mark from that unexpected encounter, not just a mess. I'm not gonna lie, I was tempted to just tell Jamie to forget it and walk away, but something about that moment, the mess, the laughter, the way he looked at me like he'd accidentally just spilled coffee on more than just my clothes, made me want to see where this would go. And honestly, that's when the day started to get interesting. I glanced at my watch and realized I was already 20 minutes late for that first meeting, which was probably the least professional thing I could do on a random Tuesday. But instead of rushing off, I found myself almost reluctant to leave Jamie standing there with that goofy grin still plastered on his face. So, I said, trying to sound casual but probably failing miserably, I guess this is my life now, stained shirts and random coffee disasters. He laughed, this low, warm kind of laugh that made me want to hear more of it. Well, at least you've got an interesting story for the day. Most people just get pissed and walk away. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises. I shot back, half joking, but also kind of proud I wasn't being a complete jerk about it. Jamie's eyes flicked down to the stain again, then back up at me. You want to grab another coffee? On me, as a peace offering. Now, here's where things get tricky. Because in any other situation, I probably would have just thanked him and said no politely. But something about Jamie's easy confidence, and maybe the whole ridiculousness of having my morning totally upended, made me say yes. We ended up back inside the cafe, standing side by side in line like we'd known each other for years instead of a few minutes. I noticed the way he ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no fuss, and the way the barista smiled at him like he was a regular. It was obvious Jamie wasn't just passing through this neighborhood. He had a way of making a space his own, even if just temporarily. We found a small corner table after getting our drinks, and there was this strange comfort in being thrown together by accident. Jamie had this way of making small talk feel like something more, like the kind of conversation you have when you want to know someone but don't want to rush it. So he said, swirling his coffee, "What do you do when you're not being a magnet for coffee disasters?" I smirked. I work in marketing. Pretty boring, honestly. I make spreadsheets and draft emails that no one really reads. Hey, that sounds way more interesting than I expected, Jamie said, leaning forward, eyes sparkling. Spreadsheets can be closeness-y. You just have to find the right angle. I laughed, shaking my head. You're impossible. That's the idea. He grinned. As we talked, I caught myself noticing little things about him. The way his hair fell just a bit over his forehead, the way his hands moved when he talked, like he was painting pictures as he spoke. There was a softness there, too. Underneath all that confidence, like he was inviting me to see more if I wanted to. Before I knew it, an hour had passed, and I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. Usually I'm glued to it, obsessively scrolling through emails or social media, but with Jamie, the distraction of the screen just didn't matter. Eventually, I glanced at the time again and groaned. Okay, I really should get going. I'm officially late for everything now. Jamie nodded but didn't move. Want to walk? I can show you a shortcut through the park. It's less crowded. I hesitated, then shrugged. Sure, why not? Outside, the air was crisp and fresh, a slight breeze ruffling the leaves on the trees lining the sidewalk. Walking next to Jamie felt surprisingly natural, like this was how mornings were meant to be spent. Not rushing, not stressing, just easy. As we strolled, he told me about the project he was working on here, some tech startup looking to break into a new market. It sounded complicated, but watching him talk, I realized it was more about the passion he had for it than the details. So what about you? He asked suddenly. Are you happy with your job, or is it just something to pay the bills? I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could tell he was genuinely curious. I mean, it's not bad. I like the people I work with, and some days feel meaningful, but sometimes I wonder if there's more out there. Jamie nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, I get that. I moved here for the project, but it's also kind of a fresh start. Sometimes you have to shake things up to figure out what you really want. There was a pause, comfortable and unforced, and I found myself wanting to say something I wasn't sure I was ready to admit. Instead, I just smiled. We reached the park entrance, and Jamie stopped, turning to me with a look that made my heart skip. Hey, if you're not doing anything later, maybe we could grab dinner? I know a great place nearby. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden invitation, but not entirely unwilling. Yeah, that sounds nice, he grinned, that same infectious grin from earlier. Cool. It's a date then. The word hung there between us, unexpected and electric. As I walked away toward my office, now stained shirt and all, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this mess of a morning was exactly what I needed. The rest of my day felt like I was walking on a cloud, which is honestly a dangerous place to be when you've got back-to-back meetings and deadlines looming. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be Jamie texting to confirm dinner or joking about the coffee incident. Spoiler, no message came through until I was already heading out of the office, but just the thought made me smile like an idiot. I'm not saying I'm usually great with dates, or, let's be real, with any kind of romantic situation, but there was something about Jamie that made me want to show up as my best self, or at least less of the guy who accidentally stains himself with hot coffee. So I took a few minutes before leaving to change into something cleaner, thank God for Casual Friday, and even tried to tame my unruly hair, which felt like a losing battle but was worth the effort. The restaurant Jamie picked was this cozy little Italian place tucked in a side street, the kind of place that felt like a well-kept secret, not a tourist trap. When I showed up, he was already there, smiling like he'd been waiting forever. I think we both knew we weren't just there for the food. As soon as we sat down, the conversation picked up where we'd left off. Easy, effortless. Jamie talked about the city's hidden gems, the places he'd discovered in his short time here, and somehow it felt less like small talk and more like he was opening a door into his world. I told him about my family, the weird quirks of my job, and things I usually keep to myself. There was a softness in his eyes that made me feel safe sharing those parts, like he wasn't just hearing words, but actually listening. It's rare to find that, honestly. At one point, he reached across the table and lightly touched my hand. Just a quick brush, but it sent a jolt of something through me that I wasn't expecting. I looked up, and he was watching me, waiting, like he wanted to see if I'd pull away or lean in. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers curl around his. It felt natural, like this was where I was supposed to be, even if nothing about today had gone as planned. We talked about dreams and regrets, things that don't usually come up on a first date. Jamie confessed he'd always wanted to live in a city like this, but something had held him back until now. I admitted that sometimes I felt stuck, like I was living on autopilot when I wanted to feel alive. There was a moment when the noise of the restaurant faded, and it was just the two of us, two people who had collided by accident but were starting to think maybe it was something more. After dinner, we strolled through the city streets, the night alive with twinkling lights and distant sounds. Jamie pulled me close as we walked, and I let myself lean in. There was a quietness between us that spoke louder than words. We ended up at a small park, the kind with benches and old trees, and sat down, just looking at the stars. I could feel his hand in mine, steady and warm. "Crazy how a stupid coffee spill brought us here," I said softly. Jamie chuckled. Maybe it was fate. Or just bad luck with hot drinks. I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder for a moment. "I'm glad it happened." He turned to look at me, eyes shining. Me too. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I kept replaying everything. The spilled coffee, the licked finger, still weird but somehow endearing, the way Jamie made me feel seen. It was all unexpected, messy, and perfect in its own way. I didn't know where this was going yet, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. The next morning, I woke up with that strange mix of afterglow and nerves, the kind you get when something unexpected feels like it might actually be good. I should have been groggy and annoyed about the alarm, but instead, I was grinning like an idiot, just thinking about Jamie and how last night had gone. I kept replaying little moments, the way his hand felt in mine, the way he looked at me when I mentioned feeling stuck, that quiet park bench under the stars. It was like the world had shifted on its axis, and suddenly, the mundane seemed full of possibility. I checked my phone before getting out of bed, half expecting a message from him. There was one, just a simple "Morning, hope your coffee's going better today" smiley face. And honestly, that tiny text made me feel like the luckiest guy on the planet. "So yeah," I replied, and we ended up texting back and forth throughout the morning, sharing jokes, random thoughts, and even a few complaints about work. It felt easy, like we'd known each other longer than a day. Work that day was a blur. I kept catching myself staring out the window or smiling at my screen because I was thinking about what we'd talked about shaking things up, about taking chances. My meetings dragged, but my mind was elsewhere, in a good way. After work, I got a message from Jamie. "Want to grab a drink tonight?" "No coffee spills, I promise." I laughed and immediately said yes. That evening, we met at this little rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline. The place was perfect. Warm lights, quiet music, and a view that made everything feel a little more magical. Jamie was already there when I arrived, looking casual but sharp, like he belonged in places like this. We talked about everything from music to travel to embarrassing childhood stories. At one point, Jamie leaned in and said, "You know, you have this way of making me want to stay in one place a little longer." That's dangerous for a guy who's supposed to be on a temporary gig. I smiled, feeling a flutter in my chest I wasn't ready to name yet. "Maybe I'm your anchor." He laughed, but then got a bit serious. "I think anchors can be good. They keep you steady." There was a tension between us then, something unspoken and electric. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, but I hesitated. Not because I wasn't interested, but because this felt important. Real Jamie must have felt it too, because he gently took my hand across the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Hey," he said softly, "I don't want to rush anything. I just want to see where this goes, with you." I nodded, heart pounding. "Me too." We stayed at that rooftop until the city lights blurred into a soft glow and the night grew quiet around us. When we finally stood up to leave, Jamie slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. The warmth of him was like a promise. As we walked through the streets, my mind raced with possibilities. Could this really be the start of something? After all the random twists, coffee spills, licked fingers, awkward first encounters, I was beginning to think yes. Back at my place before we said goodnight, Jamie looked at me with those honest eyes and said, "Thank you for taking a chance on me." I smiled, feeling the same way. "Thank you for making me believe in surprises." He leaned in, and this time, I didn't hesitate. That kiss was everything. Soft but urgent. A mix of everything that had led us here and everything we still didn't know. When we finally pulled apart, Jamie whispered, "Let's see where this goes." And honestly, I can't wait. After that night, things between Jamie and me settled into this weirdly comfortable rhythm that I hadn't really expected. We weren't officially together yet. No labels, no grand declarations. But there was an unspoken understanding that we were seeing where this could go. And honestly, that was enough for me. Our days started to blur together in the best way possible. Mornings were no longer about dodging spilled coffee disasters. Instead, they were filled with texts comparing breakfast fails or sharing silly memes. I found myself looking forward to those little moments more than I expected. It was stupidly sweet how quickly someone new could become so important. One Thursday evening, Jamie invited me over for dinner. He was still getting settled in the city, so his apartment was a bit of a mess, but it had this charm. Books piled haphazardly, a record player spinning classics in the background, and this ridiculous collection of novelty mugs that made me laugh every time I saw them. We cooked together, which was probably the most chaotic thing you could imagine. Me trying not to burn garlic while Jamie danced around the kitchen humming some indie tune. It was hilarious and perfect all at once. At one point, I caught him watching me, this soft smile playing on his lips, and I realized I was falling harder than I thought. After dinner, we sat on his couch, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his family back home, his fears, and his dreams. I shared some of my own stories, the ones I usually keep on the surface but felt safe enough to reveal now. There was a moment when the conversation lulled, that comfortable silence where you just exist together without needing words. Jamie reached over and took my hand, fingers intertwining easily with mine. "You're different," he said quietly. I looked at him, heart pounding. "Different how?" "Like you actually listen. Like you don't pretend to care, you actually do." I smiled, feeling this warmth spread through me. "I think you're the one who's different. You make me want to be better." He leaned in slowly, and this time, the kiss was slower, more deliberate. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about connection, about two people taking a chance on something real. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in that moment, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind reminding me that Jamie's time here was limited. His project would be done in a few weeks, and then what? Would this be just a beautiful but brief chapter? Or could we find a way to make it last? I didn't voice those fears then. Instead, I focused on the here and now, on the way his hand felt in mine, and the way his eyes never left mine. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments. Long walks in the park, late-night talks, and more coffee dates, with zero spills, thankfully. Each laugh, each touch, each shared secret was another thread weaving us closer. One Sunday afternoon, Jamie surprised me by showing up at my door with a picnic basket. We spent hours sprawled on a blanket in the park, sharing food and stories while the sun warmed our skin. At one point, he rested his head on my shoulder and sighed. "I don't want this to end," he admitted. I squeezed his hand. "Neither do I." We talked about what that could mean. Long distance, maybe, or me visiting him later. Plans that felt both exciting and terrifying. As the weeks passed, the reality of his departure loomed closer. We didn't want to talk about it, but the tension was there, like an uninvited guest in our happy bubble. On his last night in the city, we went back to that rooftop bar where we'd shared so many conversations. The city lights blurred around us as we held each other close. "Promise me something?" Jamie asked, voice soft. "Anything. That we won't let this be just a memory. That we'll fight for whatever this is." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I promise." That night, we said goodbye with a kiss that was both a beginning and an ending. Walking away afterward, my heart felt heavy but hopeful. Because if there's one thing spilled coffee and licked fingers have taught me, it's that sometimes the messiest moments lead to the most unexpected, beautiful stories. And this one? I wasn't ready to let it go. The days after Jamie left were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I kept replaying our last night together, the way the city lights blurred behind us, the softness in his voice when he made me promise to fight for us. But being back in my apartment, without him, made everything feel painfully quiet. I'd never really done long distance before. I mean, sure, I'd had flings and casual relationships, but nothing that felt like this kind of connection, the kind where even a stolen moment meant the world. So when Jamie texted me the next morning, it was like a lifeline. Morning. Coffee here's terrible without you, he wrote, followed by a string of emojis that made me smile despite the ache in my chest. We started texting more, the conversation stretching into late nights, each message a reminder that we were still there, on the other side of the city but somehow close. Video calls became our new normal, awkward at first, but quickly turning into something I looked forward to. One evening, during a late call, Jamie shared that his project was wrapping up sooner than expected. I'd been bracing myself for the inevitable goodbye, but now there was a flicker of hope. Maybe I'll have to stick around a bit longer, he joked, but I could hear the uncertainty beneath the humor. I wanted to believe it, but I also didn't want to get my hopes up, so I kept my voice steady. I'd like that. Weeks went by with a strange rhythm, texts and calls, occasional weekend visits, and the constant push and pull of two lives trying to merge. It wasn't easy. There were missed calls because of time difference, moments of silence when our busy schedules took over, and that gnawing doubt that maybe this was all just a beautiful dream. But then, one cold Friday evening, Jamie showed up at my doorstep. No warning, no text, just him standing there with that same grin that had first caught my attention months ago. I figured I'd save us both the waiting, he said, stepping inside. I was stunned, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We spent the weekend wrapped up in each other, catching up on everything and nothing. For those days, the world outside my apartment faded away, and it felt like we'd never been apart. On Sunday night, as we sat on my couch, Jamie turned to me and said, "I think I want to stay. Not just for the project extension, but for us." My throat tightened, and I nodded, words failing me. It felt like the answer to every question I hadn't dared to ask. The following weeks were a whirlwind of apartment hunting, job talks, and figuring out how to blend two lives. It wasn't always smooth. There were arguments over small things, moments of doubt, and the challenges of change. But through it all, Jamie and I kept coming back to each other, stronger and more certain. One night, after a particularly tough day at work, I found myself venting to Jamie over dinner. Instead of brushing it off, he listened, really listened, and then said, "I'm here. We're in this together." Those words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized that love wasn't just about the butterflies or the stolen kisses. It was about showing up, day after day, even when things got messy. Months later, as we settled into a shared apartment filled with mismatched furniture and memories, I looked at Jamie and thought about how far we'd come, from a spilled coffee and a licked finger to this life we were building together. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes scary, but it was ours. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. By the time Jamie and I had moved in together, the spilled coffee moment felt like a distant, funny story we told over and over, our own little origin myth. But there were days when I'd catch myself looking at him and wonder, thinking, how did this happen? How did a random collision on a busy sidewalk turn into this? One lazy Sunday morning, we were sprawled across the couch, half watching some documentary neither of us really cared about. Jamie was wearing one of my oversized shirts with the sleeves rolled up, his hair a mess from sleep. I could have sworn he looked like a model in some low-key magazine spread, but also totally real and unfiltered. So, he said, turning to me with a smirk, "Remember that day you looked like a walking coffee stain?" I laughed, remembering the panic and the awkwardness. How could I forget? You basically ruined my outfit, then made it worse by licking your finger. He shrugged, grinning. "Hey, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do." I shook my head but reached out to squeeze his hand. That was the best screw-up of my life. He smiled softly, his eyes tracing over my face like he was memorizing every detail. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly for that, letting me stick around after I ruined your morning." My heart skipped. I don't think it was about the coffee anymore. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. No, it definitely wasn't. The weeks and months after moving in together were a balancing act, trying to merge routines, dealing with each other's quirks, and figuring out how to share space without driving each other crazy. Jamie's music taste was a constant source of amusement for me. He'd blast these obscure indie bands while I tried to ignore it, only to find myself humming along later. And me? Well, I might have introduced him to a few too many true crime podcasts. One evening, after a minor spat over whose turn it was to do dishes, spoiler, it was mine, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the kitchen floor, laughing at how ridiculous the argument was. "I think we're going to have to learn how to argue better," Jamie said, nudging me with his shoulder, "or just learn to do the dishes faster," I teased back. He smiled and bumped me again. "Deal. But honestly, I love that we argue." "Wait, what? You love it?" "Not the arguing itself, but that we care enough to fight about something." "It means this matters." I swallowed, realizing how true that was. Relationships weren't supposed to be perfect. They were about the messy parts too. The disagreements, the compromises, the moments when you had to decide if this person was worth it. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months into living together, Jamie surprised me by setting up this little indoor picnic in our tiny living room. Blankets on the floor, candles flickering, takeout from our favorite little Thai place. We sat close, sharing food and stories, the sound of rain tapping against the window adding a cozy soundtrack. "You know," he said, looking at me with those steady eyes, "I never thought I'd find someone who gets me like you do." I blinked, heart pounding. "You get me too, you know." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "I'm serious. I don't want to imagine life without you anymore." There was a pause, a breath held tight between us. "I think," he continued, voice soft but sure, "that I'm falling for you." The words hit me like a wave. I felt raw and exposed, but also completely safe. "I've been falling for you since day one," I admitted. He smiled, relief and joy mixing in his expression. That night when he kissed me, it wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a beginning of something deeper, something real. Life continued with its ups and downs. There were days when work stressed us out, and nights when we barely spoke because we were both too tired. But there were also lazy mornings in bed, spontaneous road trips, and quiet moments where just being near each other felt like enough. One night, a few months later, Jamie and I sat on the fire escape outside our apartment, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights flicker. "Do you ever think about where this is going?" I asked him quietly. He looked thoughtful. "Yeah, I think about it a lot. And I want us to build something lasting. Something that doesn't depend on spilled coffee or chance." I tightened my grip around his hand. "Me too." We sat there for a long time, the city humming around us, both of us dreaming about a future that felt suddenly possible. If someone had told me a year ago that a clumsy coffee spill would lead me here, I probably would have laughed. But now, all I could feel was gratitude, that sometimes the messiest beginnings make for the most beautiful stories. That fire escape night stayed with me, not just because of the city lights or the cool air, but because it was one of those rare moments when everything felt clear. Jamie and I had come so far from that accidental coffee disaster, from strangers bumping into each other on a busy sidewalk, to sharing dreams and building a life together. A few months later, on a surprisingly warm spring evening, Jamie surprised me again. We were in the same spot, the fire escape overlooking the city. But this time, he was a little more nervous, a little more serious. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. Nothing flashy, just plain silver, like the kind my dad used to wear. "I don't have a big speech," he said, voice steady but full of feeling. "But I want to keep building this with you, not just the good days, but the messy ones too. Will you marry me?" I was stunned, honestly, not just by the question, but by how perfectly it fit, like the entire crazy, beautiful journey we'd been on had been leading to this. I looked at him, really looked at him, the way his eyes searched mine, that hopeful smile, the quiet strength underneath it all. "I thought you'd never ask." I joked, but my voice cracked a little because, yeah, this was everything I wanted. "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted, but then I realized waiting would just be another way of hesitating. I took the ring, slipping it onto my finger, feeling this deep, steady joy. Yes, 1,000 times yes. We didn't burst into tears or shout from the rooftops. Instead, we sat there for a long time, holding hands and watching the city hum below us, knowing that we'd found something rare. Life isn't perfect. We still have our quirks, our disagreements, and days when we're both exhausted. But I've learned that love isn't about flawless moments. It's about choosing someone over and over, even when things get messy, even when coffee spills and fingers get licked. Looking back, I realized that day was never just about a clumsy accident. It was the start of everything that mattered: the laughter, the late night talks, the quiet promises, Jamie's smile, his touch, the way he makes me feel seen and safe. That's the real magic. And honestly, I can't wait to see where we go from here. Because with him, even the messiest moments feel like home.